world didn't need me standing here staring at my other screen. How you guys doing this morning?
We're good. Got the kids back out of the house and got our house back to normal again.
Yeah, it's, the older I get, the more I'm like my dog. I just want a routine. I want to get up. I want to know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I want to go back to bed, which house guests certainly can disrupt.
Yeah, I just love to have them around. And when son and his wife from Chicago came in, and fortunately he likes spending time with his brother, so that's good. He's over to his brother's house, which is even better.
My father, I'd invite him for a week. They lived overseas, and I'd be like, well, why don't you come for a week? And he's like, George, guests are like fish. After 3 days, anyway. So, hey, Steve, how are you? Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I did.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really nice. I spent it with some new friends here in town, and yeah, it was a really good time. The food was fantastic. The company was good. It felt like about half the time talking to a super interesting 13-year-old. I sit at the kids' table for sure. And it was great. It was great. So I started writing this week's blog post about succession planning, and a couple of things recently forced me to focus on that. And one was someone in our community saying, my client wants a succession plan. I've never even seen one. Okay. It's a good point. And the other was a case I'm close to where the owner had a non-life-threatening but wake-up call. Mm-hmm. And, the difference between a catastrophic succession plan and a normal succession plan, right? So I started to write that up. Writing really focuses the mind.
Yes, it does.
So,
same as teaching.
Yeah. Well, I do a little bit of that.
Yep.
Have either of you guys written the succession plan or had a call to write a succession plan, or would having a couple of loose template succession plans be helpful?
I mean, I can probably dig something up for you, George.
Yeah, no, I'm actually pretty thankful, and I would love to see it. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, the problem you get into is that, as soon as the ink dries, it's potentially out of date, right?
Yeah, that's why it has to be.
I mean, if it's loaded with names and dates and I think the spirit of it is, the president, not the name, and the vice president, hear the expectations, and then who is in those slots at the time that it happens is probably make it a little more evergreen than a document that has to be redone. And then in the crisis mode, it's, I don't know, this the balance between, calling out individuals versus having a more evergreen.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, Joe. So here's Brian. Hey, Brian, how are you, man? Happy post-Thanksgiving. Whatever we say. Merry Christmas, by the way. Everywhere I go, people down here, I love it. They've got their Christmas trees up. They have the wreaths. They have the lights. They have the big blow-up Santa Clauses like the day after Thanksgiving. Like, good. Let's go. They started Halloween, it felt like in August. So, morning, Mike, how are you?
And Valentine's Day is being promoted as well, right?
Exactly. Let's not miss an opportunity. Hey, guys, we were just chatting about succession planning. And Joe, I think you hit the nail on the head. So let's say there's a catastrophic event, right? What do we want to know? Now, if we've done our homework, it seems to me, and this is what I'm asking, not perjured by having someone else's template. Do we need to identify if we have a good culture, we need to identify the type of person that'll fit into that culture. We might want to identify specific people who have no idea that they're on this catastrophic plan, but let's say 3 people who are on this catastrophic plan. We would want to have insurance in place that says, hey, George suffered an event, got hit by a car, whatever. That triggers the insurance. The insurance can literally go buy, like, you make it an irresistible job for someone to move. And, I was just thinking through, do you need an interim caretaker? Then what I'm a data guy, right? So let's quantify let's quantify how long the disability would be for there to be an interim, how long a disability or, death is obviously permanent, but how long a disability would be to trigger hiring someone in from the outside. What should that person look like? Are there people who would be ideal that we might want to pursue first? All of that, but that helps sow the ground, at least shows some intent. If I'm, intubated here, to get back on my feet. There's that thumb. Thank you, Zoom. I don't know how to turn those off. What does a succession plan look like? So Joe, to your point, it can be pretty loose, not that's in the case of a catastrophe. If we start talking about a longer, we're going to, hey, Larry, how are you? I'm going to pick on you. Larry is going to be my successor. And here's how, by the way, you also need insurance because you may need insurance because if let's say Larry and I have agreed that he's going to be my successor, Larry needs to know that even if there's a hiccup in revenues, which, up to a certain size we could anticipate there being, anyway, those are all sort of the thoughts that are over here. I keep looking at this screen because I have a page written on, just free-form thoughts. Barry, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning.
Chad, what's up, man?
Hey, good morning, guys.
So anyway.
So the good, bad, and the ugly, George, too, because then you have the chosen ones, right? And so now the CEO has tipped his hand to say who he's going to be as the heir apparent, which is perfectly fine. But then you have the inner sanctum of those who have made it in and who aren't in. So now, even though nothing's happened, and it might even happen for 5 years, you've chosen your people to go to battle with, and you've decided that those other folks on the leadership team are not whatever integral to the inner circle. So, the problem we get into, and I've seen this happen, that it was about probably doing about $80 million and 200 employees, my brother's company, and he had this transition plan he communicated. He was all of 45 years old, but it was an outcome of a rider for an insurance program, and you're kind of like, okay, what would happen? And that leaked out, right? And so there were some people that were very upset that they weren't part of the inner sanctum. So there's versus titles, and then titles make sense, and then who's at the title at the time of the event, that tends to be a little more palatable, I guess, from a communications perspective. So there's, as I said, the good, bad, and the ugly.
Yeah. And it's interesting that goes to our friends over at the Business Enterprise Institute and their owner-based planning program, which I think is being offered today and tomorrow. They talk about some of these issues, Joe, and synthetic equity. And that I'm a huge, not just a fan, ardent advocate for transparency. And how do we, your point's a good one, Joe. People will weave voodoo if they're not read in, if they don't know exactly what's going to happen. They're going to invent a scenario. We can't help it. It's what we do as animals. But if our if 2 layers down is read in and they have a reason, right? There's a what's in it for them for buying into this plan. It's an interesting topic. Anybody having, Barry, you ever?
George, just to complicate your situation, one of the systems that I use looks at the whole management staff.
Yeah.
And ideally you go 3 deep in the system for the whole staff, not just the big kahuna.
That's what but yes, you and I are saying the same thing.
Okay.
Right. Because if in my heart of hearts, I may know that I'm never going to be the CEO, but I do want to know that I'm a valued member of the team, that everyone around me wants me here, that they respect my contribution. Those are all the things that we want. That gets to my something I talk about that doesn't really get talked about very much, but the dignity that should be attended to your job. And I know that's kind of touchy-feely, but being paid what the market will bear, or with the opportunity to make a little more for your family if you work harder, and knowing that you're doing your job well and that your peers value your contribution, those are happy makers, right? Those are hallmarks of really dysfunctions, right? Those are hallmarks of a business that has done what it can to minimize dysfunction.
Mm-hmm. But just to make sure that we're on the same page, so I'm talking about like the head of manufacturing, who's going to replace that person, and who's going to replace the person below that, and the head of marketing, the head of sales, blah blah blah.
Sure. So, and then it comes back to and what does that look like on an interim basis or on a permanent basis, and who could step in? And I was acting in a role for a while. Sid was acting in a role for a while. She ended up becoming, getting the title. But it's pretty normal to be in an acting as. So the acting director of, absolutely. I mean, a healthy organization is not at risk from, or has done what it can to minimize risk from people, and things happen in life, right?
Yes, they do.
So yeah, right. Don't you? Yeah, don't we all know it?
But a lot of
Those
times,
are tough conversations to have. So even if you have the system in place, so even if you have the succession planning culture and you have the methodology, to have the conversations with people who have the expectation here in a company. I'm even thinking back in my Roche Pharma days in big company, to have to hold conversations with people who have this expectation, but you see their performance and potential. That's the grade we use, performance and potential. And you see them differently than they see themselves, and to have that tough conversation. So there's that aspect, and because people don't know how to have that conversation, they want to avoid it. They don't actually then put succession planning in place as well. So it's kind of a circular challenge in that sense.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely. And
yeah, I had one client where the CEO retired this year, and because of a real nothing to do with me, but for years they had a succession planning process in place and groomed that next CEO. The transition has been fabulous, and she went from interim to now approved to be the CEO. And it's when you see it work well, you see how a company could go through the transition quicker, better, and actually in this case maybe come through the other side stronger.
it's interesting because that gets to fierce conversations, right? Yeah. Which we all, I mean, none of us like to have them.
and that word might be the word you're looking for, George, is interim.
Yeah.
Because that gives a lot of outs to the, things change, but assign them as an interim, and then, you still got to earn your way in, but at least we identified.
Absolutely. That's setting proper expectations because,
Well, interim and acting, two different words, have two different meanings to everybody in the organization, and depending on the type of organization, to investors and others. Interim means you're there temporarily, and everyone will function as though you're only going to be there temporarily. When you're the acting, you are the CEO until it is finalized or some other event that's planned occurs. So we had those discussions whether, in my client's case, Liz should be acting or interim. And unfortunately, for Habitat for Humanity, the board thought interim. In the end, it all worked out. But there's actually a message it sends to the organization, interim versus acting.
That's interesting. Words matter, right? Yeah, words matter. How about you, Barry? How do you deal with it in families? He's like, oh, no.
CEOs are going to live forever. They're never going to leave. They're never going to die. They're never going to move. There's no succession. No, all kidding aside.
It's on top of who doesn't want to be me? Of course, my company's valuable. And by the way, I'm immortal.
It's an interesting scenario in a family business because there's so many moving parts.
Yeah.
My experience with the families I worked with, quite frankly, there really wasn't a real succession plan. And I was looking for an article I think I wrote on this topic. And a lot of the things that were mentioned on this call included in that article, I believe. Businesses, I believe, need to have a succession plan for every person in the company because people move, people die, people get sick, and it's the business needs to be prepared. Does that ever happen? In my opinion, no, it never happens. With the CEOs of these family businesses, it's an issue because usually they're the patriarch of the family, and it's not only a huge loss to the business, but it's a huge loss to the family. And there are books and books written on this topic and conversations on this topic. You can put together all the best plans in the world you want, all the legal documents, all this stuff. It means, in my opinion, from a business point of view, it means nothing other than having things buttoned down, because you've got that component of what does the business do without that owner, because usually everything's in his head. I was working with a family a few years ago, and the owner was this is the famous case, George. The owner was in his 70s, and he had nobody next in line. So part of the work that we did was to hire, you may have heard me talk about this before, but hire a CFO, and the family would rely on that CFO for everything. I mean, he got to the point where he was actually teaching the kids how to do a checkbook, okay? the wife on how to do a checkbook. So, I mean, it really, this is common in a lot of businesses, is my experience, especially family held businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's a problem. It's why we do what we do. We can put together all these life insurance and all this other stuff. It really, it means a lot. But, a company I'm working with now, construction company, there's his succession plan is he bought a $5 or $10 million insurance policy to carry the company so they can close out the projects and liquidate the company. That's his succession plan.
That's a shame because, all those jobs.
Because there's nobody. No, they'll get jobs. That's not, but I understand. I'm respecting your point, but that's his succession plan. And that's with a lot of companies. They don't, the owner just, so I died,
It's funny. We did some work years ago with the American Gemological Society, and you'll see their sticker on basically every jewelry store you ever go into. And they were trying to help their members create a next generation because generally speaking, Barry starts a jewelry store. He runs the jewelry store. He decides to retire. What does he do? He sells off the inventory and puts either a for sale or for rent sign in the window, and that's the end of that. And
Well, Barry, in that circumstance you just spoke to, is the life insurance being used to fund some type of stay bonus plan for the key people to stick around so that the jobs that are in process don't blow up?
Mike, that would be great. I don't know. I don't remember if that's part of the plan. I have been, one of the things that you've spoken about, and you're absolutely right, is a contingency plan. Well, in my report to him was, let's put together a contingency plan. Okay. Now his wife is an attorney. She should know better, but a very successful attorney. But I don't believe, but yeah, I mean, there should be some type of stay bonus.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Get them to stay, at least the bonus at the end, get them to stay and receive that bonus at the end. But there's no contingency plan. And I, like yourself, I recommend a contingency plan. Even if they have all this other legal stuff, how's that business going to run? What's his desire to get that business to continue running?
Mm-hmm.
George, I have this document called the Business Continuity Instructions. I don't know if I shared it with you, but I'll share it with you. You can put it in Circle.
Great.
But it kind of is it's about 12 pages long, but it kind of makes the owner sit down and say, if something were to happen to me, this is the first thing I want to happen. This is the second thing I want to happen. Here's who's going to take over. This is who's going to be in control. This is who I want to call our clients. And, it kind of lays everything out, including it talks to issues like, especially in general construction, right? If you have major projects going on and something happens to the owner, you could say, well, we'll just wind down and liquidate. But if you don't have those key project managers or foremen sticking around to make sure that those jobs are completed, as they are scheduled to complete, then I've seen it. I've seen a company's net worth just dissipate and disappear because people are jumping ship, right? Because they're very afraid of their future now that, Joe isn't here anymore and he hired me and he's gone. So I'm looking out for my family. I'm out of here. As soon as the bigger and better offer comes, I'm gone. Yeah, I really like Joe and his family, but I'm looking out for my family first. So then what happens, all those jobs don't get managed the way they should. And before you know it, they're running at losses. And I've seen a company's net worth just totally disappear because they're not. And so the stay bonus plan being funded by insurance and letting those folks know, this is my plan. Guys, if something were to happen to me, there's an insurance policy that's going to fund this plan to pay you very handsomely. I'm not talking about, 10% bonuses. I'm talking about pretty substantial bonuses for you to stay on so you can help my family liquidate this company. And so I can at least get the net worth back out, the book value, if you will. Sure. At least I can get that, distributed to my family. And there's something big in it for you as well.
Yeah, Mike, that's a friend of mine. He's not a close friend, but he owned a business. He consulted with me a couple of times. He dropped dead at 48 of a heart attack, left everything to his wife. But he was a smart man. And I don't know all the details, but I think he had that insurance and she had the runway then, and she had worked in the business originally with him, the runway to come in and take time to keep that staff. And I had met that management team. They were darn good, and to keep them and to keep the business going and for that management team to run it. So
Right.
it's critical. But there, there's something on the far end of this too. We're talking about owner contingency, business continuity planning, as Mike said. But there's something very simple throughout the organization that is important, and that's cross-training. And that is for a person in the middle of the organization or lower down in the organization. Take a driver in the construction that I have as a client. Drivers, when those drivers went down and one quit, one from injury and one quit, the company gets paralyzed. How do you cross-train someone to back up the driver? How do you cross-train someone to be a cashier at a store? How do you cross-train? The list could go long.
Absolutely.
But that cross-training is also that next evolution of a healthy organization, preparing for, inevitably, to Barry, your point, shit happens all the time.
And it's amazing the power of checklists. This goes to SOPs, but Larry, your points are really good. I mean, what the hugely complex organization that cross-trains nonstop, the armed services, they cross-train nonstop. And
that's also another reason too, George, another tool. And I wish I sold insurance because I'd probably be very rich. No, I'm kidding. But Key Man Life Insurance is also another tool that people use so that if they, not necessarily just for the owner, but also or other key people, if they were to, become disabled or God forbid die, and you haven't trained that person, that successor yet, you have money to go out and recruit. You have money to come out, money that's available for you to go out and do a heavy recruiting campaign to find their replacement without interrupting and without draining company cash flow, because you have this insurance policy, these proceeds come in and you can use that money for that purpose, right? So that's another tool that I see being used for, the Key Man life insurance stuff, which, there's tons of life insurance people out there. Well, I don't think they call themselves life insurance agents anymore. I think they call themselves financial planners, but they're right. I mean, but it's a great tool for that purpose, right?
absolutely.
And the other thing too, just to add to that, is that even in the case of an owner passing away, sure, you need money to fund, the state bonus plan. But you also may need money if the owner's personal balance sheet has been used to guarantee company debt, company bonds. That personal balance sheet is now locked up in someone's estate. And, the people who are granted credit are going to be a little nervous. They don't have that balance sheet anymore. So that's another reason, for life insurance, Key Man Life Insurance, to kind of replace that wealth that the creditors usually, rely upon to extend credit.
So, Michael, I have a question. How often have you had the conversation with them about these topics before something tragic happens?
Well, good question, because I have a call at 12 today with a gentleman that I've been working with, and he wants to start looking at this because he realizes that he's it. I mean, if something were to happen to him, and he's got 3 businesses, he realizes that if something happens to him, it's all going to fall apart unless he starts doing this kind of planning. So I have one person this afternoon I'm going to be talking to, and then I have a couple more that I've been talking to. I send them some white papers on business continuity planning. They understand it up here. It's just that, they usually don't get around to doing it. And because it's never going to happen to me, right? It's going to happen to someone else. But yeah, so I'm starting to get some traction on it, Barry, just to answer your question. And part of the conversation, as you guys alluded to at the beginning of this call, is that not only do you have to have these tools in place and these plans in place, but the biggest thing they need to do is to have a full succession plan in place for almost every key position, because you never know when someone has to drop out or for whatever reason. You have to have their replacement being trained to step up. And that's part of the continuity planning. That's an integral part of it.
It's interesting, Mike, building on, you just made a point. So I'm thinking about our last blog article and okay, so if you're looking to help your client or looking to win new clients, who are the logical people out there with whom you can have this conversation. Could be the business owner, but it could also be their advisor, their personal advisor, insurance, health advisor, right? You're gonna have a conversation that says, listen, I'm going to, your client in all likelihood has not de-risked their business. And if together we help them understand the value of the business, what's at stake, how this could play out well, how this could play out poorly, and how for relatively small dollars, right? This isn't, COLI can be term insurance, right? It doesn't have to be an expensive whole life plan.
Right.
With some planning fees and some cost-effective risk mitigation, we can actually talk about sleeping better at night. And now this is the article last week, right? There's a WIFM. There's a what's in it for me for the personal advisor. We'll lump them together to say, you know what? Yeah, I do want you to meet Joe. Let's do it. And this is all, it sounds self-serving, but who the heck benefits the most? The business owner and their family benefit immensely. The ROI for them, the peace of mind, the ROI, and beginning to do the work on the senior leadership team so that we are de-risking the business on a macro scale from being too dependent on one person. And there's that's an additional topic, but yeah, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of the way I kind of like when I start talking to owners about exit planning and they kind of like push back, I kind of lead with this saying, okay, well, fine, maybe you're not ready yet, but I would argue you should be always getting ready for it. But have you done what kind of planning have you done for these? I call it the 5 Ds, right? Death, disability, divorce, disagreement, distress. What kind of planning, what kind of contingency planning do you have in place? And just in case something happens to you. All right, forget about thinking I know you don't want to talk about your exit, but just think about what you have now and what are you doing to plan for that. And I usually get people to start. I kind of get them to start engaging with me on that basis, and I start with that. And then once we go through that process, then I think it's easier to go into, well, let's talk about your business now and what it needs to look like for you to retire and the whole exit planning exercise. But it's a good way of getting people engaged because I think they can see the danger of not doing anything, right?
Yeah.
Well, and then Larry can probably speak to this better than I can. You take successful publicly held companies, part of their board mandate is to build that succession depth for the company. But then you take multi-generational family held business enterprises. The one thing they have in common is that they have addressed these issues and they have a plan and they have a charter and they have all the things that are in place that provide for the succession. Succession is a huge part of the conversations that these families of these multi-generational businesses have. Now, there's other reasons why they're successful as you study them, but it's fascinating to look at some of these multi-generational families that have succeeded. Mm-hmm. You have others that have not succeeded that are very famous, but there's a lot of reasons also why they have not succeeded.
Yeah. Barry, to that point, when you look at Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and he compares what great companies do, that Rockefeller habits checklist type of things they practice versus good companies. He's not even comparing them to bad companies. Good to great is, what is that checklist specific to and unique to family-owned businesses that are multi-generational great versus good? And what that checklist would be, I could see that having a lot of value for our community in going, for us to go deeper in understanding those nuances.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a good book I was listening to called Every Family's Business. Have you heard of that one, Barry?
Yes. Yeah.
The 12 common sense questions, as this guy goes through an actual story about how his family business, because they had these meetings and they asked these questions every year with everyone. I thought it was very insightful.
Yeah. There's that's Dr. What's his name? He's
Thomas William Deans.
Yeah, Thomas Deans. I've seen him speak.
It's very interesting how he this one family did to keep everything going smoothly, and then they'd have these meetings every year, and they'd ask these questions, and it kept everyone engaged. It was very good to keep everyone up to date and informed and everyone together, so there wasn't like different conversations going on. And different assumptions and
Yeah.
different agendas. I mean, it kept everyone together. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, there's a number of books and authors. A friend of mine wrote a book called what's it called? Anyway, what he did is he interviewed, forget how many families around the world, and he interviewed the second and third generations, not the first, but the second and third. And really, it was a book about standing in the shadows of basically of the patriarch of the family. And in many cases, these kids, this generation left and did something else, and they came back, but they always had that conversation around. It's fascinating.
Well, and it's
then
tough.
there's another book, a PhD that interviewed families throughout the world that had businesses that were 100 years old, and they had one common thread. They had the succession planning conversations constantly, and there's other common threads among those. It's been a while, so I don't remember.
And that the success rate, right, at when you get to the fourth generation, is like 4%. I mean, it's very, very low. Even from first to second, success rate is very low.
Well,
but Michael, that's been a study that was done by John Ward at Kellogg a number of years ago. And you have to realize that maybe those businesses, what wasn't clear when I read it was that those businesses, maybe the original business was no longer around, but there was another business that was still in the family. And that's when I adopted the terminology, and it's been adopted not just by me, but by many, is our families in business, because they could have multiple businesses that, where in the statistic do those businesses lie? So.
Yeah, interesting.
But that's an interesting statistic, Michael.
Yeah, you see it all the time. And
it's interesting, when in the engagement do we have this conversation? So if we let's think about it from the growth drive process perspective. Do we have this conversation after we put the CEO through Clarity One? Do we have it after, at what point in the engagement would it be? I don't even know if there is an ideal point, right? It kind of is case driven, but
you're talking about the business continuity piece?
Yeah, business continuity.
I
mean, if we've used it with a personal advisor to actually start collaborating on a case, okay, well then that's probably a conversation at the front end. If we have a client, Mike, someone you're working with right now, it could be, is it in week 1, week 10? When do you say, hey, what happens? I mean, maybe and this is part of the growth conversation. It's implied in the growth conversation. And when do we say, remember when we were talking about and the impact this would have on your family and what would happen if it didn't, right? Can we pull on that thread? Can we pick at that for a moment? And can we talk about really, okay, so let's look at the stats. The odds of you dying at your desk are low, but the odds of you being disabled at your desk are exponentially larger than that. They're still small, but they're exponentially larger. And maybe we should have a conversation about this topic.
Well, the EPI, the Exit Planning Institute, they put out a statistic on this, and their research has found that 50% of business transitions are the result of unplanned for events. Yeah. 50% of transitions. All right. One of the 5 Ds, right? Death, disability, divorce, disagreement, distress. So it's not like it's not low. I mean, the odds are high. And so while you're doing great things now, and, George, when you take them through Clarity One, and they know they have to build this thing and they want to build this thing. Okay, but on your way to doing that good stuff, what happens if,
yeah,
you get disabled, you can't come to work anymore, you God forbid you die. Divorce, disagreement, and stress. I guess divorce and disagreement, if you have other owners, you probably if you have a good buy-sell agreement, right? I mean, you could probably deal with those circumstances if you have good documents.
Good and up to date.
Right? Like prenuptials and buy-sells. I mean, you can kind of deal with them, I guess, in a way.
Yeah.
You can anticipate them, and distress is everywhere, right? Cybersecurity issues. I mean, there's all kinds of risk threats there too, which is you need to have a good risk insurance, some kind of risk analysis or some kind of risk program mitigation.
Yes.
But that's what sometimes I do it in the growth conversation, and sometimes when I walk them through Clarity One and they say, yeah, we got to do that kind of stuff. And I say, well, that's great. But you know what? You also have to think about what happens if you along the way, if you don't get to that goal that you want to get to. And what do you have in place now, to make sure that your family gets the money they need, right? You want to make sure you leave your family with the amount of money they need, that your business continues, and that it's transferred to the person to whom, or the persons to whom you wish it to be a transfer to. You got to nail those things down. And then the other thing I found too is that even with sure, I have a buy-sell agreement, and we get our company valued every year at fair value, and our buy-sell agreement is fully funded with insurance. Great, right? And you think, well, then I think your family is okay, but not necessarily so, because if you have a business that's worth $5 million. And you have two owners, right? And it's they have a buy-sell agreement, and they each would get $2.5 million if one should pass away, and they have insurance for that. And one of them passes. Let's assume that those two owners are pulling out $350,000 a year in salary from that business, and one of them passes away. All right, now their family gets $2.5 million. I don't think they can make $350,000 on that $2.5 million every year if they invest it, right?
And Mike. Yeah, that's a point that John Brown made. He's made a couple of times, and it's he had a client come back, and I forget what the amount of insurance was, but the client came back and he thought he had done right. He heard that the owner had passed away, and he's like, well, at least they had that insurance. And he heard sometime later from the widow, who said, "How could you do this to me and my family? How could you?" Because the
$5
million doesn't yield. Yeah,
you're going to be short unless you start invading principal. And if you have a young family, you can do that pretty quick. If you're pulling out $350,000 and now you have $2.5 million put to work, and you're making 5% on that, I don't know what you're making, 150, 100, you're short $200,000 a year. Yeah. So a lot of people think that, well, I have that fully covered. Well, no, you don't. I mean, you may need insurance outside of the business in some kind of islet or something, so that you can provide for your family. So that's the great anomaly. The income that a business owner makes from a business is not the same as the income of a like kind investment of similar value, because the owner's pulling compensation out, and making those kinds of returns in addition to, the underlying value, which you don't get. So that's something that, I focus people on. Make sure, I know it's fully funded and you're getting fair value, but is that enough?
Yeah. This is good. This is good. This is important. Guys, it strikes me as we're talking, I'm sort of looking around the room. Let me poke a hole in another system. Do you think an EOS implementer is having this kind of conversation? Right? They're not. They don't have any of what they have the intelligence, fine, and they care, but they don't have any of the tools to have this conversation.
It's also a matter of perspective, right, George? It's a matter of perspective. If you're looking at holistically the whole system, or are you just focusing on one thing?
Yep.
Because you got to look at the whole system, which includes the family, the owner, and the personal financial planning of the owner, the estate planning for the owner. That's what this comprehensive exit planning, especially John Brown's program, right? Yeah. Gone through his, which I have. I mean, it's not just, you got to focus on making the business more valuable and transferable, but that's only one of his 7 steps.
Yes.
All right. You got to talk about, okay, now what are your exit options? Do you understand your exit options? What are the pros and cons? Okay, have you done your personal and exit and your estate planning as well? And how does that relate back to all your goals? Mm-hmm. So it's more of a more comprehensive, more holistic. It's not just, and that's
yeah. Well, and the insurance and the personal advisors, right? Maybe I'll just get into, when I say personal advisors, I mean insurance, wealth advisors. I'm just lumping them together. They have the legal staff, right? They can do an island. They have the legal staff that, as part of a planning fee, would be brought to bear to help put these, to help draft these documents. And it becomes a very, it's not easy, but a straightforward and clear path to getting this done. Not, okay, oh my gosh, now I need to figure out which attorney, and is that attorney competent? No. The people at at Mass Mutual, Northwestern Mutual Life, UBS, that legal staff has got this, and to them it's stock and trade.
I'm curious about why you asked that question, George.
The original question?
Yeah, EOS.
Oh no, I was just, because I'm thinking about, because several of you have challenged me to differentiate what Growth Drive does versus EOS, because EOS is pushing a lot of marketing out there and saying, talk to an EOS implementer, be run on EOS, et cetera, which is fine. There are things that we do that are we are very, very different than EOS, right?
Yeah, I would say that based on limited experience I've had, and this is about 3 years, and just it's an easy add-on for an owner to do with little risk involved, and so it's popular, right? It's just populist wave. But it's certainly, and Andy Weevil has the term, he uses EOS plus, and I think that's just something that we ought to kind of embrace, to say it's an adder to that, to some system of accountability, whatever that might be, whether it's the other tools that are out there. There's lots of them, but we see ourselves as a tuck-in extension to the accountability that once it's in place, we're much more impactful. Matter of fact, we see that if a company, and this is, I'm just suggesting a byline, is that, if the company has some sort of system like that, a business operating system, we're, X% more effective in getting to the end in mind. I'm thinking there might be a kind of a pivot there on sort of that. It's an and product versus a substitute product.
Sure. And EOS is evangelizing, and that's great because the market needs it. We are a more holistic and quant based system. We're not a qual based system. We're quant based.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to stand here, but there will be a compare and contrast, and it will be published very publicly. And I will invite people to shoot holes in it because we want it to be accurate.
And it's very easy to say there's so many people who have self-implemented and they take bits and pieces and, just kind of leave the rest behind. So it's easy to be a cafeteria business operating system using EOS, because then you can kind of go in and pick and choose what works and ignore the others, which irritates the heck out of some of the purists. EOS is fine, it's fine, but the reality is they set it up, years ago, set it up to be a self-implementation option, and a very real one to address the needs of the lower end market that just doesn't have the wherewithal to pay for a consultant to come in and do their gig, and so. Is it a lead to further work? It's kind of like, what is that? I'm not ready for a full-blown clarity level 2, but if you, ruminate me and, just kind of feed me, Mr. Owner, a diet of information, and someday I might qualify. That's where I think EOS does a really good job, is allows people to come in and take off pieces of that fit them. So anyways.
Yeah, it's a good, and by the way, I'm a fan of a lot of what Gino did. I'm a the Vision Traction Organizer is a good document. We just released 3 documents in the last week. If you've seen the strategy planner, that is meant to help guide the growth conversation and would take the place of something like the VTO, good doc. But we're going to go from a strategy planner, which is really personal vision, professional vision, and then boiling it down to 4 quarters. That's great. But then we quantify the business, right? I'm not going to get on that. If we're short on time, I'm not going to get on that soapbox. But this has been a really interesting conversation. I want to thank each of you guys. I took some notes over here, and you may see your name in the next blog post.
Did you say that Brown was going to do some sort of presentation today?
They have a paid course today at noon to 3, and tomorrow noon to 3. It is the owner-based planning course. It is only $500. It is. I have participated in it. Larry participated in it. Anyone else on this call participate in that? And it is to get your brains to start putting these things together, and then BEI in their planning software has a lot of these docs. And, they're innovating. I really admire them for it, and it's a sign of a healthy business. And that course is being offered today, and it'll be. I don't know at what pace, but you'll hear me continue to talk about it because I think it's.
So George, what does it cover? I mean, John, when at the conference, he told me I should sign up for it, and I looked at him and I said, "Wait a minute, John, I went for your full your full blown credential. I mean, do I need to take this? And he said yes. And I'm like, all right. I think he was just, my mind was like, well, you're just trying to sell me another course to take. But what does it cover? I mean, in very general terms, what are the topics?
Yeah, Larry, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'm doing
There's facilitation
memory.
for
I
you.
forgot to bring my book with me that has the 3 elements, but I think he has defined owner-based planning in 3 terms. And a lot of it is de-risking the business, but also positioning financial, like you said, Mike, a lot of what you said before really fits into, I think, one of his 3 around the insurance component of it. I don't remember, George, all 3 in his exact words.
Mm-hmm.
What I think structurally he's done a good job is, what is the step before exit planning? What is that step? And it includes these 3 elements, one of which really fits nicely to growth drive and using the growth capacity clarity tool to support that valuation, development, and de-risking. And that's where I think John's vision with yours, George, fits in, is number 3, which is probably the biggest of all 3 of those elements, dealing with value.
Yeah.
So I think just to learn, I don't know about paying the $500. They're not great trainers. It's good, very good content. They're just not great trainers, but I could see it really resonating with our community.
Yeah, and that was, we participated in their beta class with.
I think it sounds very familiar to. I think I'm going to have to listen in on just to confirm it, but it sounds very similar to Snyder's approach with the triggering of it.
It's just one element, I think, of the 3.
Yeah,
Because I think what he does in that event is that he shows the value gap in the business, shows the profit gap in the business, and he shows the wealth gap in their planning.
This is different than, so the triggering event is critically important, right? And we do some of that in Growth Drive. It's critically important to get that light bulb to start just pulsing, right? But owner-based planning, to Larry's point, is, all right, you have an effect. The premise is this: you run a business, you have a senior leadership team, and in that team is tasked with, let's say we're going to grow value. They are tasked with growing value. How do we, 1, make sure that they are motivated, that there's a what's in it for them? There's that fun bubble. They have a what's in it for them, that we've de-risked, that we have succession planning, we have stay bonuses, and that we've also protected, but this is important, we've protected cash. Right. So rather than writing a discretionary bonus at the end of the year, hey, Barry, great job, here's 10 grand, 50 grand, 5 grand, whatever. We actually have some portion of cash and some portion of non-qualified deferred comp. And that deferred comp can be used, and you can have stock appreciation, right? Synthetic equity, or a bunch of other tools that they talk about inside the course. But how do we make sure that the senior leadership team has a win, a clear personal win from doing this work, and that they are motivated to stay, no succession. Barry's running a business. He has a team, that team has a win, a clear win, and a reason to stay in the business rather than laying awake at night wondering, is Joe has been going to lunch a few times. He's been gone a long time. And is he talking to the competition? Is he going somewhere? Is Joe, or maybe he's just out whacking golf balls? No. I think he's talking to, we all entrepreneurs are
paranoia,
right? So
paranoia.
Yeah, paranoia.
Right.
Thank you. Joe's like, hey man, I just went out for lunch. There's nothing. By the way, Occam's razor. Okay, guys, I have to scoot. This was a great conversation. Thank you. Terrific. That's terrific.
All right, guys. Good talking to you. George, I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Yes, you will, Mike. I'll see you at 3:30. Brian, I'll be back to you. Barry, I owe you something as well. I'm on it. That's my day.
Hey, George. Talk to you also.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, man. Be well, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.